may have heard a little bit earlier about Blockbuster Video, so it was a wonderful coincidence that that came up in the transformation conversation. What's really interesting about Blockbuster is that they saw the digital video revolution coming as early as the year 2000. So in 2000, Blockbuster had locations within driving distance of 90% of Americans' homes. 90%, that's crazy. They were so dominant. And in that same year, they actually signed a deal with Enron for 25 years of bandwidth so that they could ultimately own the streaming revolution when it came. And in fact, a few years later, they acquired a mom and pop video company that was doing online video delivery out of Arizona. They bought them for $1 million, and they gave them $25 million, and they said, build us a Netflix killer. Now, obviously, didn't work out so well, but why is that? They saw it coming, they were willing to spend money, they went and built the thing. They did not integrate this business into the culture of Blockbuster whatsoever. They did not allow them access to the people and resources that Blockbuster already have. And most importantly, they gave them no access to Blockbuster's biggest business advantage, which was their giant network of franchises. So Blockbuster really kind of shot themselves in the foot. And it wasn't about not seeing it or not having the strategy. It was how they executed on the people side. So Blockbuster lost the ability to bring these people along with them, to bring their franchisees along, to build a network of people that truly understood where the business needed to go, and then bring them forward together as a unit in a way that felt positive. Not everybody's failure is going to be written up in the news or, frankly, being used in talks 15 years later. The reality is that many of our failures are as simple as people not communicating with each other, or the right people not being connected at the right time and sharing the right ideas. So I think the most important thing out of this story is the reality that most of our business problems are actually about people. So how do we as leaders take that and flip the script and turn it into a positive story? Most organizations, even when they realize, okay, we know that the way our people working together might be getting in our way, they're looking at who works together, not how those people come together and get their work done. So we're currently thinking about work in sort of this hierarchical org chart way, and really most organizations, this is the picture that you see if you want to figure out who's working together, how do I get work done? So if I've never worked with this group before, I pull them up in Workday, and I see that, okay, this person's on this team, and this is their director, and this is, in theory, how decisions are getting made. The reality is a little bit messier. And we all know this, but we don't have a picture to look at that tells us the truth that we can all talk about and agree on. So the way that work actually gets done is we see things like people who are have the ability to give access to leaders, like this admin, end up with enormous positional influence. And not necessarily influence that we want them to have. And they have the ability to be a gatekeeper, and therefore they have the ability to let things pass through or not. Or we even see things like this manager in the middle who's holding together these two disparate teams, but maybe that's because they just moved over from that other team. So they were in the team on the right, and now they've moved to the team on the left. Well, of course they're still going to maintain those relationships. It's not like they're going to stop talking to their colleagues that they worked with for 5 years the day that they move to a new team. We know that there is a reality of how work gets done that exists outside our current view. And what's really cool is that there is actually a body of research that sits at the intersection of sociology and graph theory, and don't worry, there will not be a test about this later, that allows us to understand how do people work get done, how do people get work done, how does influence flow throughout an organization, how do people share ideas, who are the people that are the agents of change, and there's 20 to 30 years of research that backs up algorithms that allow us to have metrics that can quantify all of this information. So there is a tool that we can use called organizational network analysis that gives us the ability to have insight and data around all of these messy, wonderful, exciting people interactions. So we as leaders have the ability to tap into this, to use it, to be more human. So instead of saying, well, this person has to do this thing because of their role, because of their title, because of what team they're on, we can actually go to the people that are showing up in the right way at the right time and ask them for their help directly, at scale and with speed. How does organizational network analysis work? But it really starts out with data collection. So in this particular case, data collection is a couple different methodologies, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But really, it's about understanding what are employees doing every day, and what other electronic data do we have that supports that. So how can we pull things together like workday data, for example, or email data, or engagement survey data to understand how people are collaborating. Then we can use a number of different SAS tools to analyze the data. So we want to make sure that we're using social network metrics. So we're going to do things like use Google's PageRank algorithm to understand and quantify influence. And then it's the fun part. We get to visualization and reporting. So once you've taken all this data in, you've analyzed it, you come out with a beautiful picture of here's how the organization is working together. And the picture is cool, but where the value really lies is then you also have the ability to rank and sort and create groups of people who might be your top change agents or your top influencers within different parts of the organization. So if you have an initiative where you know something big is coming, I really got to get these people on board, and it's an international issue that we're dealing with, and so I don't know who those people might be, and I don't have time to go to every single one of their leaders and have them make a list of their top 10 people, this is when you can pull up your O&A data, you can create a list of your change agents, and you just reach out to those people and say, hey, this is what I want you to know, and can you help us out and make sure that others are aware of the same information? So let's dig in a little bit more. So data collection. There are two different ways that you can collect data. You have active data collection and passive data collection. So active is as simple as going to your employees via a survey and just asking them, who do you work with and how do you work with them? It's very straightforward. The other thing that's great about active data collection is that it introduces the idea of transparency. Passive data is fantastic because it allows you to take that active data, so what employees say about their peers, and then quantify it even further and apply additional context. So for example, so we see a number of different logos up here of tools that people use to interact at work. So Slack, obviously, Outlook is a big one. You can look at calendar data. You can look at email metadata. I personally love the instance of taking active data collection and matching up who employees are saying are the people that influence them with passive data from Salesforce to understand what are the behaviors of our sales team. So if we can see who's communicating externally and how often with our customers and how well are they doing as a salesperson, but also internally, how are they showing up for their peers? What kinds of relationships do they need to have within the organization to be able to get the job done for the customers that they support? And there's now a whole body of work that shows that the best salespeople are actually the folks who have the deepest relationships within their organization. Not the most, the deepest. So they are showing up in a way that is very trustworthy, transparent, reliable for the people within their own company. And guess what? They're doing the same thing for their customers. So to talk a little bit more about the active data collection piece and relational surveys, how these surveys are structured is incredibly important. So anytime that you send out a survey to an employee, I don't care if it's an engagement survey, I don't care if it's net promoter score on attending an event, you are contacting them and you have the ability to build trust or not. And the beauty of a relational survey is that if it's communicated really well, you are giving people the opportunity to elevate their peers for positive work behaviors. And that is something that really all of us could celebrate more. We're doing it through a survey, but the data we get back out of it allows us to have real conversations with people. So this, to me, is sort of the first step in how do we as leaders use data at scale to be more human. So from an analysis perspective, there are a few different tools that we can use that are purpose-built for organizational network analysis. So one of them being Gephi, which is kind of the open source granddaddy of them all. Very often used for academic research. It's free, which is great. It's open source, also sometimes great. But that also means that as a business leader, you're not just going to be able to open it up, upload your data, and get right down to business with figuring out who's your #1 change agent. Humanize is particularly interesting. So Humanize allows you to actually take in digital data from things like badges. So as you swipe in and out of the office or move around with RFID badges, Humanize gives you the ability to match up the active data that employees tell you with locational data. So for example, if you're thinking about, I want to go to an open plan office, and right now I'm in cubicles, or everyone has individual offices, you can figure out what relationships might I be disrupting, and what people might I want to group together so that they can collaborate more easily. Another one that's interesting is Microsoft Delve. So Delve is doing some things now that are not super well known, but within that Microsoft 360 ecosystem, you do have the ability to be able to start to build some of these networks. You don't get the visual yet, but you can understand who's working together, who's communicating with each other. You can get a lot of metrics around frequency. You can understand things like, are people meeting together when they're supposed to be by looking at Outlook calendars? So the output of many of these tools is this network diagram, which is what you're looking at right now. So it is as straightforward as a dot is a person, and a line is simply a relationship that connects them. So this is data that was pulled from a relational survey only. We did pull some demographic data from Workday. And what you're looking at is the top 500 influencers from a 5,000 person organization. There are 2 clusters, very distinct clusters, of executive offices. So what do you think might be happening there? And the answer is, in fact, that this is immediately post-M&A. So what you're looking at is an organization that has not fully integrated at a leadership level, but on the upside, they're getting there. There are definitely relationships between those 2 groups. But moreover, there is geography that are separating those 2 groups as well. So this cluster in the middle that's connected to Sales North America and also to the R&D group is the original headquarters in New York. This cluster at the bottom is actually the acquired company's headquarters that is in South America. So the fact that these groups are starting to build relationships when they're separated both by corporate culture and geography is really impressive. So this gives you a high-level visual of what's happening. It doesn't tell you specifically what's going on. So this is where we have the opportunity to put our investigator hats on and go, okay, well, what part of the business do I own? What am I seeing at a high level with maybe how my group is interacting with others? And now where can I do some more question asking and potentially intervention? So in this particular scenario, I was working with a really, really fantastic CIO who cared a ton about innovation and who really cared about how people work together. So he had about 3,000 people out of an organization of 50,000. And he had just done a reorg, and he was curious to see whether what he had tried to do was being accomplished. So pretty simple hypothesis. Did I accomplish my goal? And what he saw was that on the whole, yes, work was happening the way that he had expected it to, except for this little odd group right here. So this app development, IT delivery, and cloud architecture, you can see they're not very big groups, but they are building new cloud applications for this entire organization of 50,000 people. So they're small, they have to work together very closely, and they have to move really, really fast. And what concerned him is that this big blue dot in the middle is kind of holding everything together. So who the heck is that? What are they doing? And who are they that they're showing up this way, that they're holding everyone together and everyone else is kind of off in their own little land? Meet Steve. Steve has been with the company more than 30 years. Steve is a high performer. Steve loves to collaborate with people. Steve loves to say yes when he's asked for help. Steve is also 18 months from retirement, the only tenured application architect that the entire organization has, and the next person behind him has been there less than a year. Yes, exactly. That is the reaction that you should be having. And that was exactly what the CIO did when he saw this, was, oh, crud. So we have an interesting situation. Steve, who is wonderful, is potentially a massive risk to the organization. What's even more interesting is that after the reorg, these two women were now the directors of their respective business areas. And although that they are both leaders, they have no direct connection to each other. Down here in blue, we can see this application architect that's been there less than a year. So yes, he's on the fringes of the network because he's a newer guy. And the person that he's connected to, he only happens to be connected to because they worked at a previous company together. Steve is a risk. So how do we solve for Steve? So first of all, there were a couple things we needed to do. So number one, so we really needed to figure out how do we systematically build trust and build relationships between these two women so that they are operating in lockstep, so that they know exactly what they need to be doing. The second piece is then going to this new application architect and saying, hey, you know, we noticed that you're kind of just not super included in what's going on. Is everything okay? Do you feel comfortable? How's the role going? Just a really kind of candid feedback conversation. And his feedback was, I love it here. There are lots of really cool problems to solve, and I want to talk to Steve about them, but he's really busy. So Steve, who is this fantastic person that has all this knowledge that wants to share it, just by being who he is, has created this perception that he might not be available for mentorship or information sharing or knowledge sharing. Steve's director went back to him, and she worked with him on two fronts. So front number one was, hey, let's build up the relationship between you and this newer app architect so that you know each other, you're meeting together on a regular basis, that just things are working the way that they should. Because you know what? You're really integral to this organization. Look where you sit. People love you, and you're doing a great job. Let's help him get there. So that was thing one. Thing two was very data-driven, and she came up with it on her own, and it was awesome. It was very sort of objective and key results-driven. So she told Steve, hey, for every 4 requests that you get for help, collaboration, knowledge, whatever the case may be, if it is not project specific to you, I want you to route one of those to the new guy. I don't care if you think he doesn't know it. I don't care if you think you could do it faster. Just send it to him. Give him a chance to ask questions, give him a chance to feel included, and give him a chance to learn a little bit. And Steve was like, sounds great. No problem at all. So other use cases for O&A. We've talked specifically about communication flow, information flow, and coaching down to the individual level, and that's great. But at a high level, if you're thinking about doing this, what are some other things where you might say, hey, this would be an awesome time to use that network thing I learned about? So physical use of space is a great one. So office moves, wanting to understand things like influence and how does location drive that. So fun fact, people who sit by a restroom or a kitchen have statistically higher influence than people who sit by a window or away from a main walkway. Nothing to do with how good they are at their job. It's purely because they sit by a place where people congregate or pass through frequently, and so they're recognized. Inclusion, my personal favorite, being able to take data and apply it to a topic that can be as sensitive and difficult to quantify as something like inclusion. So for example, if you go to all of your employees and you say, hey, who supports you at work? Who helps you create opportunities for your career? Who collaborates with you? Who makes introductions that allow you to advance? And you look at that data and you say, okay, objectively, I have some managers who are doing that equally across all of the different kinds of people that might work for them. And I have some managers who seem to be doing this for people that look just like them or have the exact same background or only went to the same college or whatever the case may be. This allows you to have data-driven conversations about how those folks can show up for their people better. The Steve scenario, if Steve had just quit and there was any sort of innovation that needed to happen between those groups, obviously that puts a bottleneck in the whole thing. They're not talking to each other the way that you'd want. So making sure that information and knowledge are flowing across the organization in a way that allows new ideas to come to the forefront is incredibly important. And now you can do this with data. So my question I'll leave you with today is, where do you need more visibility in your organization? I'd love to talk to you about that more. Thank you.